What started as a regular first-round match at one of tennis's biggest tournaments turned into one of the most talked-about scandals in recent women's tennis history. A young Filipino player named Eala faced Czech teenager Teresa Valentová at the 2026 Qatar Total Energies Open in Doha. And what unfolded during and after that match has shaken the sport to its core. Before we get into everything that happened, if you're following stories like this one, where the drama goes far beyond what happens on the court, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell. We cover the moments that matter most in tennis, and this story is one you won't want to miss a single update on. Now let's get into it. The Qatar Total Energies Open is not just any tournament. It's a WTA 1000 event, which puts it among the most prestigious stops on the women's tennis calendar. It's held at the Khalifa International Tennis Complex in Doha, and every year it draws the biggest names in the sport. When something controversial happens here, it doesn't just disappear quietly, it becomes part of tennis history. Eala came into the tournament with a lot to prove. She's a 20-year-old from the Philippines who has been working her way up through the ranks with real purpose and discipline. She trained at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, which is known for producing technically sound and mentally tough players. Alex fits that mold perfectly. She has a powerful serve, a clean backhand, and a composure on court that makes her seem older than her years. Fans in the Philippines, who are some of the most passionate tennis supporters anywhere in the world, were watching Doha very closely. They wanted to see her make a statement on a big stage. Her first-round opponent was Teresa Valentová, also 20 years old, from the Czech Republic. Valentová was no easy draw. She had a strong junior career, including a title at Roland Garros Juniors, and her ranking had been climbing steadily. She hits the ball flat and hard, and she plays with confidence. On paper, this looked like a fascinating battle between two young players who both had something to prove. Nobody expected it to become the center of a massive integrity investigation. The match started exactly the way fans hoped it would. Both players came out competing hard from the very first point. Alex was doing what she does best, using heavy topspin on her forehand to push Valentová back behind the baseline and control the rhythm of the rallies. Valentová was pushing back with flat, penetrating ground strokes, trying to disrupt Alex's timing and take away her comfort zone. It was competitive, it was intense, and the crowd at the Khalifa complex was loving every moment of it. The first set went all the way to a tiebreaker at 6 games all. That's usually where the real pressure kicks in, and everyone leaned in to watch. What happened during that tiebreaker is where things started to feel strange, at least in hindsight. Alex was doing everything right. She was mixing up her serve placement, changing her patterns in the rallies, varying her approach shots. These are all things a smart, experienced player does to keep an opponent guessing. The problem was that Valentová didn't seem to be guessing at all. Every time Alex changed something, Valentová was already there to meet it. Serves that were carefully disguised were returned with confidence. Tactical shifts were countered almost instantly, without any adjustment period. To people watching carefully, it felt like Valentová somehow knew what was coming before it happened. That's an unusual feeling to have watching a tennis match, and it planted a seed in the minds of those in the stands and watching from home. Valentová won the tiebreaker and took the first set. After that, things fell apart quickly for Alex. Losing a tight tiebreaker is mentally tough for any player, but the second set was almost impossible to explain by normal standards. Valentová surged ahead and closed out the set 6-1. From the outside, it looked like a total collapse from Alex, like she had crumbled under pressure. That's exactly how many commentators framed it in the immediate aftermath. People questioned her stamina, her mental strength, her ability to compete at this level. Those takes spread fast on social media and hit hard. But Alex's team wasn't focused on the scoreboard. They were focused on what they had seen during the match. Her coach and support staff reviewed footage of the match, looked at patterns of play, and went through the statistical data point by point. Within hours of the match ending, they had filed a formal complaint with the tournament. The concerns they raised were specific.
They believed that Valentova's anticipation of Alex's serves and tactical patterns was not just good tennis, it was unnaturally precise. They also pointed to certain moments during changeovers that they felt were worth a closer look. The tournament took the complaint seriously. The WTA's integrity unit got involved, and what was described was a comprehensive review process. Investigators didn't just watch the match back on video. They reportedly examined detailed match statistics, audio from on court where it was available, surveillance footage of the player areas, and other materials that are permitted under tournament regulations. The scope of the investigation made it clear that officials were treating this as something significant, not a minor procedural complaint. The central allegation that emerged was serious. It was suggested that Valentova may have had access through unauthorized channels to real-time predictive analytics about Alex's serve tendencies and tactical patterns. In plain terms, this means that live data about how Alex plays, where she serves in certain situations, how she constructs her rallies, how she responds to pressure, may have been fed to Valentova's team during the match itself and communicated to her in real time. If true, that would be a profound violation of the rules and the spirit of the sport.
To understand why this matters so much, you have to appreciate what professional tennis is really built on. Players spend years, sometimes their entire careers, developing ways to disguise what they're about to do. The way a player tosses the ball before a serve can be worked on for thousands of hours just to make it harder for an opponent to read where the ball is going. Rally patterns are constructed deliberately to create uncertainty and draw errors. Every small variation a player introduces is a calculated move in an ongoing mental chess match. The whole competitive framework depends on neither player knowing in advance what the other is going to do. If one player has real-time access to data that reveals the other's patterns as the match is happening, that balance is completely destroyed. It's not a small edge, it's a fundamental break in competitive fairness. Investigators also reportedly looked at some behavioral patterns during the match. One of the things that drew attention was the timing of certain physical habits, specifically how often Valentova adjusted her wristband or her racket dampener at high-pressure moments like break points or deciding games. On their own, those kinds of actions mean nothing. Players touch their gear all the time. But when analysts overlay the timing of those actions with detailed match data, they sometimes find patterns that raise questions. That's what investigators were reportedly looking at, not as proof of anything, but as part of building a broader picture. It's important to be clear here. Patterns are not the same as proof. The investigation process exists precisely to distinguish between coincidence and genuine wrongdoing. Everything that was being examined at this stage was still being weighed carefully before any conclusions were reached. Then the official statement came out. The Qatar Open Tournament Committee, working alongside WTA integrity officers, released a statement that sent shockwaves through the tennis world. The language was firm. The committee said that following a comprehensive review of match data, video footage, and other relevant materials from the match between Eala and Teresa Valentova, serious violations of the Code of Conduct had been identified. They described the violations as substantial, not minor or procedural. The statement said that investigators found evidence of unauthorized external assistance and unsportsmanlike conduct that had compromised the competitive fairness of the match. As a result, Valentova was retroactively disqualified from the 2026 Qatar Total Energies Open and provisionally suspended from all WTA-sanctioned activities pending a full disciplinary hearing. A retroactive disqualification means the result of the match is thrown out. A provisional suspension means she cannot compete in any WTA events while the process plays out. Together, these are among the most serious interim measures available in professional tennis, short of an outright long-term ban. The committee closed its statement by saying it would not tolerate actions that undermine the reputation of the tournament or the spirit of the sport.
For Alex Eala, the ruling was significant. She had walked into her post-match press conference after the loss and handled it with complete professionalism. She didn't accuse anyone. She didn't speculate publicly about what had happened. She gave a measured assessment of her performance and faced the cameras with composure. Behind the scenes, her team had already been working through official channels to raise their concerns. Whatever she was feeling privately, she kept her public conduct clean throughout. The reaction from fans was swift and emotional. Supporters in the Philippines, who had followed the match closely and had initially had to watch Alex get criticized unfairly online, now rallied behind her loudly. Analysts who had written harsh takes about her supposed mental weakness and lack of composure began walking those assessments back. The conversation shifted dramatically from questions about Alex's ability to much bigger questions about what had really happened in that match. Several commentators made the point that if the committee's findings were upheld through the full disciplinary process, the implications would go beyond just this one match. A WTA 1000 event is one of the most important stages in women's tennis. If a match at that level was affected by unauthorized technological assistance, that's not just a scandal involving two players. It's a question about the integrity of the tournament itself and what the governing bodies are doing to protect it. From Valentova's camp, there was reported silence at the time the story broke. That's not unusual in these situations. When formal legal or disciplinary proceedings are underway, athletes and their teams are often advised not to speak publicly. Silence in these circumstances isn't necessarily an admission of anything, but it does tend to shape public perception in the short term, especially when the other side of the story is so visible. The broader conversation this controversy triggered is one that tennis authorities probably weren't ready to have publicly. Advanced data analytics are now deeply embedded in professional tennis preparation. Before a match, coaches and analysts look at serve tendencies broken down by situation, rally patterns in different court positions, pressure point statistics, physical movement data, and much more. All of that, used within the rules during preparation, is entirely legitimate. It makes players better and raises the level of the sport. But the allegation here is that someone took that kind of data and accessed it improperly during live play, giving one player real-time information about her opponent while the match was happening.
That's a different category of problem from what tennis has typically had to deal with. Match fixing, doping violations, on-court coaching debates, these are all challenges the sport has faced and built systems to address. But real-time technological assistance during a match, if confirmed, is a newer kind of threat. It raises difficult regulatory questions about how competition is monitored, what kinds of technology are present in player areas, and whether current enforcement mechanisms are adequate to catch this kind of violation. Those are questions that the WTA and tournament organizers will need to answer as this case moves forward. The provisional suspension means a full disciplinary hearing is coming. At that hearing, all the evidence will be presented formally. Valentová will have the opportunity to respond and present her own case, and a decision will be made about what sanctions, if any, should be applied. Depending on that outcome, there may also be an appeals process. None of that happens overnight, and until it does, the provisional findings are just that, provisional. It's also worth noting separately that earlier in the reporting around this story, there were mentions of a doping complaint being filed. Any allegation of that kind would be handled by a completely different process with its own governing body and standards of evidence. It should not be conflated with the on-court integrity investigation, and it would require its own official confirmation before being treated as established fact. What this story ultimately comes back to, at every level, is trust. Tennis is a sport that depends almost entirely on the belief that both players on the court are competing under the same conditions, with the same information, with the same preparation, and with the same rules applying to both of them. The moment that belief is seriously undermined, everything gets called into question, not just one match, but the broader legitimacy of results across the tour. That's why cases like this matter so much, and why the tennis community watches them so closely.
For Alex Eala, however this process concludes, the experience has already shaped her story in ways that will follow her throughout her career. She handled an incredibly difficult situation with maturity and dignity. She didn't lash out. She didn't play the victim publicly. She trusted the process and let her team work through the proper channels. That kind of character is noticed, and it matters. The tennis world is now waiting for the next step in the formal proceedings, for Valentova's camp to respond officially, and for the WTA to provide clear and transparent communication about what happens next. Whatever comes of this, it has already forced a serious conversation about how the sport protects itself in an era where data, technology, and real-time information are part of everyday professional competition. This story is far from over, and as the disciplinary process moves forward, every development will matter. Stay close to this one, because the final chapter could be the most important of all.